The story we all know and love begins with a dead man. You would think it's the protagonist staring at the horizon dreaming of tomorrow. But no. The very first image Oda gives us, the thing he decided the entire story of One Piece should open with, is an execution. A man on a scaffold, surrounded by a crowd, facing his end. And before he dies, he says something. That's it. That's the setup. One page, one man, one speech, and then he's gone. The story that follows, 1100 chapters of it, is the fruits of it. Here's what most people miss about this moment. Oda didn't open One Piece with its protagonist. He opened it with its most significant character, and that character had already been dead for years before Luffy ever set foot on a boat. Gol D Roger is the hole at the center of this story, the absence that shapes everything, the man who matters more dead than most characters ever could alive. The world knows Gol D Roger as the Pirate King, the man who conquered the Grand Line, found the legendary One Piece, and amassed wealth, fame, and power beyond anything anyone had ever seen. That's the myth. The man was something else entirely. The world government needed Roger to be a myth because myths can be controlled. A warning, they thought. A cautionary tale. They needed the scaffold to be a period at the end of the sentence of Roger's life. They got their execution. They built their stage. They controlled the location. Town, which was his birthplace, for maximum symbolic weight. The beginning and the end, they thought. To drive the point home that everything he was and everything he dreamed ended right there. But here's what nobody accounts for when you try to turn a man into a warning. What if the man doesn't cooperate? The world government controlled the scaffold. They controlled the crowd. They controlled the guards and the date and the narrative that would follow. They controlled everything except the last thing, what Roger chose to say while standing on it. And Roger knew that. He surrendered knowing that. The execution wasn't something that happened to Roger. It was something he walked into on purpose, with a plan already fully formed, knowing exactly what he was going to do when he got there. Let's be precise about what actually happened at Town. Roger didn't get captured. He surrendered himself to the Marines, walked in voluntarily, knowing he was dying anyway from his illness, and handed himself over. He chose Town as the execution site. The world government selected it for symbolic impact. It was his birthplace, the beginning and end of Roger, to send a message. What the world government didn't account for was that Roger had already turned that symbolism against them. He stood on the scaffold and said, "My treasure? If you want it, you can have it. Find it. I left it all in that place." The world government wanted a warning, to show the people the consequences of Roger's actions. Roger turned it into a treasure map. The crowd's reaction, that single speech, those few sentences on a scaffold, launched the Great Pirate Era. A single man's last words, spoken in the knowledge that he would not see the consequences, ignited a fire that the world government has spent the entire intervening 20+ years trying to extinguish. They doubled down. They tried to tarnish his legacy. They hid his true name, the D initial that mattered so much to Roger himself, insisting on Gold Roger rather than Gol D Roger. The conspicuous absence of that middle initial is a small, endlessly telling detail. The world government was so threatened by the D that they edited it out of history. And Roger, standing on that scaffold in his final moments, understood exactly why. He knew what the D meant after Laugh Tale. He saw the world government's fear of it, and he went to his death smiling. Compare this to Joy Boy from 800 years prior. Joy Boy couldn't fulfill his promise. He left an apology carved into a poneglyph in the sea forest, a personal letter saying, "I'm sorry I couldn't make it happen, but someone will." Joy Boy wrote his unfinished business into stone, knowing it would outlast him, hoping someone would come along 800 years later to finish it. Roger did the same thing, albeit a different method. Joy Boy left a poneglyph apology. Roger left a speech that broke the world open. Both men understood something most powerful figures in history never learned. The most durable legacy is one that other people want to continue. Did the world government realize immediately what Roger had done? Almost certainly not. Not the full scope of it. You don't realize in the moment that you've lost. You only understand later, when the pirates start coming and keep coming and won't stop. Moments like where Whitebeard confirms the One Piece is real from his own deathbed. When generation after generation of dreamers keeps pointing toward that scaffold and saying that's why I'm here. By then it's too late. The fire has been burning for years. The single most greatest feat of Roger isn't that he just conquered the Grand Line. It's that he lit a fire that literally cannot be put out. Now we need to go further back. Before the execution. Before the disbanding. Before Roger turned himself in. The Roger pirates reached the final island of the Grand Line, the island that had not been visited in 800 years. They pieced together all 4 road poneglyphs, and in doing so, decoded the full history of the Void Century, and found what Joy Boy left behind. And when they saw it, whatever it was, The entire crew laughed hysterically, and Roger, in the middle of all of it, said he wished he had been born in the same era as Joy Boy. And then he named the island Laugh Tale. Then he came home and started designing his own death. What did Roger find at Laugh Tale that was so funny? This is where confirmed canon gets murky. Roger said he was too early, because the ancient weapons necessary to act were inaccessible. Specifically Poseidon, the future Shirahoshi, who hadn't been born yet, and who Charlie predicted would take another 10 years to be born. The conditions required to act on what Roger found simply did not exist yet, and Roger knew that he was not the next Joy Boy. He was not the one the prophecy pointed to. He reached the end of the world, decoded the greatest mystery in human history, and the answer was, not you, someone else, someone not yet born. Sit with that for a moment. How do you process that? You've sacrificed everything, your health, your years, your crew's safety, your family's peace, to get to the end. And when you get there, the answer is, you're too early. The person this was written for isn't alive yet. And this man's response was to laugh. That is, depending on how you read it, either the most enlightened or the most extraordinary thing in this entire series. He found the answer to the world's greatest question, realized he personally couldn't act on it, and responded with joy, named the island accordingly, then went home and started designing a legacy that would make sure the right person, when they eventually arrived, would have something to inherit. Here's a strong theory worth considering though. When Roger said, "I wish I was born in the same era as you," he may not have been referring to Joy Boy of the past at all. Before chapter 968, the natural assumption was that Roger envied Joy Boy's ancient era. But after that chapter, another reading became compelling. Roger may have meant Luffy's era, the future Joy Boy, the one still to come, the one Roger knew was coming, the one he set the world on fire to summon into existence, the one he would never get to meet. Shanks cried after his final conversation with Roger. Roger told him there was someone he was waiting for, and it wasn't Shanks. Roger sent Shanks out with that knowledge. Find the one. When Shanks met Luffy and passed the straw hat to a 10-year-old boy in a barrel, he was completing Roger's assignment. I think by now we can all agree that the straw hat wasn't just a sentimental gesture. It was a signal to every surviving Roger pirate that Shanks had found the one Roger was waiting for. Roger understood he was not the chosen one, and it didn't break him. It freed him. Roger couldn't finish it, so he spent his last energy making sure someone else could. And if that isn't peak writing, I really don't know what is. The ability to accept the horizon you can't reach, and build a ladder for the person who can. The world government hid Roger's middle initial. That tells you everything you need to know about how seriously they took it. Gol D Roger. The D is always in the middle, never announced, never quite explained, but always present. It connects things that shouldn't connect. Roger understood after Laugh Tale exactly why the world government feared that letter, and he went to his execution as Gol D Roger, making sure the crowd heard it. What is the will of D? We don't have a complete answer yet, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. What we have are patterns. D carriers face death differently, with a laugh, with peace, with defiance rather than fear. Roger smiled at his execution. Ace smiled when he died. Dragon carries it forward in his revolution. The D is described across every source you can find as something closer to the will of death, the act of passing one's dream forward through death itself. You don't simply die because you fail anymore. You die because you succeeded in making the dream more important than the dreamer. Roger is the clearest expression of this philosophy in the series. He didn't die from his illness. He chose the terms of his death. He chose the timing, the location, the words, and the impact. Every element of his ending was designed to make the dream bigger than the man. The D isn't a birthright, it's a method. It's the understanding that your death can be your greatest act of generosity if you use it correctly. And that is exactly what Roger did. The will flows like this. Roger passed it to Ace biologically, but Ace was killed before inheriting. Roger passed it to Luffy spiritually, through the straw hat, through Shanks, through the speech that made Luffy want to be Pirate King in the first place. Roger told Whitebeard the truth, setting Whitebeard's entire endgame in motion. Whitebeard then spent his final years trying to make Ace the next Pirate King, and when Ace died, he used his death to confirm the One Piece is real, extending Roger's message across another generation. Roger planted his dream everywhere, in his rival's endgame, in his own biological child, in the dreams of every pirate who heard that speech and took to sea. So with this in mind, could you still boil the D down to just a bloodline? I would dub it more of a commitment, and Roger's genius is that he understood you can't hoard a commitment. You can only honor it by giving it away. There are 3 relationships that really make Roger shine. There is something about Roger that even his enemies couldn't resist. And the 3 great relationships of his life illuminate exactly what that something was. Garp is by all accounts the man who came closest to killing Roger. They battled each other countless times across the Grand Line. Garp is one of the strongest Marines in the series. Roger is the Pirate King. Everything about their existence is supposed to put them in opposition. And then, at the end of his life, Roger asked Garp to raise his son. You would think this man would have asked Rayleigh or Gabon. But no, he asked his greatest enemy and rival, the man who had spent decades trying to arrest or kill him. And this is the part that always lands wrong until you think about it. Garp said yes. Why? Because Roger at God Valley had watched Garp in a moment of genuine moral choice. When innocent civilians were in danger, Garp acted not as a Marine following orders, but as a man who couldn't let children be killed, regardless of their parentage. Roger saw that. He saw that Garp was fundamentally good. Not good by institution, but good by character. That beneath the Marine uniform was a man who would protect an innocent child even at cost to himself. Roger didn't need a loyal friend to raise his son. He needed someone who would protect Ace because it was right. And across all his enemies, all his rivals, all his crew, the person who fit that description most reliably was the Marine who'd been trying to catch him for years. What does it say about Roger that he trusted his greatest enemy with his child's life? It says he was a better reader of people than almost anyone in this world. And it says the ideology didn't matter to him as much as the character. Roger seemed to believe that Marines and pirates aren't different at their core. The Roger and Whitebeard relationship is different from the Garp dynamic. Garp and Roger were enemies across a moral divide. Roger and Whitebeard were something more like equal rivals. When they first met, they fought for 3 days and 3 nights. Then they split the loot equally and laughed. That's not really how enemies behave, is it? That's how peers treat each other when they respect one another. And then, this is the act that sets Whitebeard's entire endgame in motion. Roger shared the truth of Laughtail with him. The actual truth. The Void Century. Joy Boy. The full picture that the world government had spent 800 years trying to bury. He gave his greatest rival information that could have been weaponized against him, or kept as a private advantage, or simply held as Roger's secret alone. He gave it away. Why? Because Roger had a philosophy. The truth belongs to everyone. The dream doesn't require exclusivity. If Whitebeard understood what Roger understood, he would either protect the dream or carry it forward. And either outcome was better than letting it die with one man. Whitebeard didn't carry it forward himself, but he tried to carry it through Ace. And when Ace was killed, Whitebeard died on the battlefield at Marineford, confirming to the world, with his last breath, that the One Piece is real. That confirmation, from the world's strongest man on his deathbed, was the second great injection of momentum into the era Roger's speech began. Whitebeard echoed Roger across a generation. That echo was made possible because Roger decided to be generous with the truth. Whitebeard spent years guiding Ace toward becoming Pirate King, because he believed in Roger's vision of who should inherit it. Roger's generosity rippled forward in a way he couldn't have fully planned, but clearly would have hoped for. The most powerful pirate of the next generation spent his final years serving the dream of the man he'd once fought to a draw. That's the downstream effect of choosing to share rather than hoard. Roger's crew, composing of individual monsters, were not secondary characters by any measure. They are legends in their own right, each of extraordinary capability and will, and they were all, willingly, subordinate to one man. Roger was not the kind of man to command loyalty. He attracted it. Much like Luffy, the distinction matters enormously. Commanded loyalty is conditional on power. Take away the threat or the reward, and it dissolves. Attracted loyalty is something else. People follow because they want to be in the presence of someone who makes them feel like they're living in the direction of something real. Rayleigh met Roger when they were both young men. Roger crammed onto a small boat Rayleigh had been sleeping in. Odin was so drawn to Roger's presence that he leaped overboard from Whitebeard's ship and tried to fight his way onto Roger's in the middle of the Grand Line. Luffy has the same thing. Every person who meets Luffy either ends up wanting to follow him or is actively working to avoid admitting they want to follow him. The magnetism is identical in source. Both men project complete authenticity about what they want and why, and that authenticity is somehow irresistible to people who have forgotten how to want things completely. The inherited will is a sort of magnetism. It's the quality of making other people's dreams feel achievable by being near someone who has never stopped chasing their own. Roger contracted an incurable disease. He recruited Crocus specifically to manage the symptoms. Not cure them, because there was no cure, but slow them down enough to make the final voyage possible. Crocus agreed not because he thought he could save Roger. He agreed because he understood that Roger didn't want to be saved. He wanted to keep going until the end. How does knowing you're dying change what you do with the time you have left? For most people, it probably doesn't change things in the way we'd hope. Fear, grief, a narrowing of the world as pain and loss of capacity take over. But for Roger, knowing he was dying meant something specific. No more waiting for a better moment. The illness was the deadline that turned a great voyage into the great voyage. Without the terminal diagnosis, Roger might have circumnavigated the Grand Line more carefully, Because of it, he went at full speed from the beginning and never stopped. The disease is, in a dark sense, the thing that accelerated the entire story of One Piece. If Roger had been healthy, he might have had decades more time, and he might have spent them waiting for the right moment. The illness closed off that option. There was no right moment coming, and so he charged the end. He gathered the road poneglyphs, decoded the Void Century, reached Laugh Tale, learned everything, disbanded his crew, and surrendered to the Marines, all within a compressed time frame that an illness made non-negotiable. Now go ahead and compare the three great figures of that generation. Roger chose his ending on his own terms, designed his legacy, controlled his exit, transformed his death into his greatest act. Whitebeard chose to live fully and die standing, refused to be taken alive, made his last stand at Marineford, went out as who he was. Garp chose to survive, and in surviving watched everyone he loved die around him. He outlasted Roger, outlasted Ace. Survival in Garp's case is its own kind of punishment. Of these three, only Roger faced a hard deadline and used it. It forced Roger to stop postponing and start completing. Step back from the characters and look at the architecture. One Piece begins with Roger's execution. Every single arc in One Piece is, at some level, a downstream consequence of that event. The Great Pirate Era exists because of his speech. Luffy's dream exists because Shanks was at that execution and received Roger's final assignment. Marineford. The Paramount War is downstream of Roger sharing the truth with Whitebeard, who shaped Ace's ambitions, whose death at Marineford triggered the war. Every road poneglyph hunt, every arc involving the Void Century, every revelation about the ancient weapons, all of it traces back to the fire that one speech lit. Oda understood something about narrative that most storytellers miss. The most powerful character in a story doesn't have to be present for most of it. In fact, for certain kinds of stories, stories about legacy, inheritance, the way the past shapes the future, the most powerful character might be most powerful precisely because they're absent. An absence creates a shape. The shape draws everything toward it. Roger is the gravitational center of One Piece, and he exerts his gravity entirely through what he left behind. His ship is in pieces. His crew is scattered. His son is dead. And the story he set in motion is still moving, still building toward the conclusion he couldn't reach, still pulling dreamers toward the end of the Grand Line, still infuriating the world government with its refusal to stop. Is there another character in fiction who is simultaneously the most important figure in the story and the least present one? The answer might genuinely be no. And the reason it works, the reason Roger's absence feels like a presence rather than a gap, is that Oda gave him one of the best death scenes in history, before he ever gave him a single living scene. We knew the shape of Roger before we knew the man. The reveal, slowly, across hundreds of chapters, with Oda giving us one piece at a time. Joy Boy started off with the straw hat, then to Roger, then to Shanks, then to Luffy. It is not a treasure in any material sense. It's a hat made of straw that a child could lose in the wind, and it might be the single most important object in One Piece. The hat is the physical form of inherited will. Every time it passes hands, it passes a promise. When Shanks gave it to Luffy, he was not making a sentimental gesture. He was sending a signal to every surviving Roger pirate that he had found the one Roger was waiting for. The hat is the authentication code, the key that opens a network of support and belief that Roger built into the world before he passed away. So if you literally track the hat, you track the dream itself. The dream is older than Roger. It's 800 years old. It will outlast Luffy too, if Luffy doesn't finish it. But he will, because each generation of the man that bore that hat has been slightly closer to the conditions Roger said weren't ready yet. Each generation has been slightly more equipped to complete what Joy Boy started. The hat is the receipt, proof that the dream is still in transit, still moving toward its destination. Logetown's name is a portmanteau of prologue and epilogue, the town of beginnings and endings. Roger was born there and died there. Luffy passes through it at the start of his own journey, standing on the same scaffold where Roger stood, reaching toward the same sky. For a second, in a moment that Oda clearly intended, it looks like Luffy might be executed there too, until lightning strikes the platform and he escapes. Oda designed One Piece's geography around Roger's life cycle. The town that brackets Roger's existence also brackets Luffy's East Blue journey. The prologue of the whole story is an epilogue of another story. Every Luffy moment in Logetown is Roger's shadow in motion. The world government built the scaffold to deliver a message. They built it tall so the crowd could see. They built it in a symbolically resonant place. There are three overlapping qualities that make Roger not just unusual, but almost singular as a character. Accepting limits without being defeated by them, Roger reached Laugh Tale and found out he wasn't the chosen one. He was too early. He had a terminal illness, and he could not finish what he started. And his response was to laugh, name the island after laughter, and immediately begin planning for his successor. This is not the response of a broken man. This is the response of someone who has, through some combination of temperament and philosophy, genuinely separated their identity from their outcome. Roger didn't need to be the one who finished it. He needed it to be finished. Roger gave away everything that mattered. His secrets to Whitebeard, his son to Garp, his hat to Shanks, his legacy to the entire world through his last speech. He held nothing back. And here is the paradox. Everything he gave away made him more powerful, not less. Every secret shared, multiplied into action. Roger is the most powerful figure in One Piece's history, and he spent the last acts of his life in an act of total generosity. Roger found the answer to the greatest mystery in the world, realized he couldn't act on it, and was happy anyway. There's no tidy way to read this. It is either the most enlightened thing in One Piece, a man so fully present in the act of living that resolution is secondary to the journey, or it is the most heartbreaking, a man laughing at a wound too big to acknowledge any other way. Oda gives us both and doesn't resolve the tension. Laugh Tale's name is both a truth and a question. Roger laughed. Was it triumph or tragedy? The answer is probably both, and the ability to hold both things simultaneously, to laugh at what breaks your heart because the alternative is to stop moving. That is the philosophy that One Piece is built on. The series has spent over 20 years demonstrating that the point is the reaching, not the arriving. Roger found the answer and couldn't act. Joy Boy left the treasure and couldn't retrieve it. The dream requires not just the right object, but the right moment, the right person, the right world. And creating those conditions, making the world ready for the dream to be completed, is the actual work. Roger's death proves that freedom outlives the free. You can execute the man. You can build the scaffold in his hometown and make it a spectacle. You can erase his middle initial from the history books and call it Gold Roger and pretend the D never existed. You can do all of that, and the dream persists anyway. Not despite you killing the dreamer, because of how the dreamer chose to die. Luffy is Roger's answer to what happens when someone chases the same dream without the burden of knowing the full truth. Is that naivety? Going after the Pirate King's title without knowing what it actually means? Without the complete picture of Joy Boy and the Void Century and the world sinking? Or is it exactly the kind of innocent momentum that the world needs? Roger knew too much. He reached the end, knowing the full weight of everything he found there, and the knowledge was almost the thing that would have paralyzed any lesser man. Luffy moves without that weight. Luffy chases freedom because he wants to be free, not because he knows the cosmic significance of what freedom means to the world's history. That naivety might be the design. Roger's wisdom set the stage. Luffy's innocence is what makes it possible to walk onto it. The will of D, as I mentioned earlier in this video, is not a bloodline. It is not a power. It is, at its deepest level, a method for making dreams outlast dreamers. Roger embodied it completely. He passed his will through his death, into the world, making the dream more alive for his dying than it would ever have been for his continued living. Roger might be a tragic figure. He died before he could see any of it. He never met the person he was waiting for. His biological son died, killed before he could inherit anything. His greatest wish, to be born in the same era as Joy Boy, was never granted. But does that debunk the fact that he was a triumphant one? Absolutely not. He finished exactly what he intended to finish, which was never the journey's destination, but the journey's continuation. He built a world where someone like Luffy was possible, where a boy from the East Blue could eat a legendary devil fruit, get a hat that had been waiting 800 years for the right head, and set sail toward the exact dream that Roger died declaring. The conditions Roger created worked. They worked completely. Every piece fell into place. Oda's understanding of legacy expressed through Roger is not about monuments or titles or the things you build while you're alive. It's about what you choose to leave behind when you know you're leaving. Roger left behind a speech that cracked the world open, a dream that a generation couldn't extinguish, a hat that carried the promise forward, a son who carried the name forward even to his death, a rival who carried the message forward with his last breath. A crew that scattered to the corners of the world to wait for the one he was waiting for. Not one of those things required him to survive. Every one of those things required him to choose carefully, to be generous. Roger surrendered to the world, on his terms, at his moment, using his last breath to hand the world to everyone who came after him. And standing on that scaffold, built by the people who feared him most, he did the thing that no execution has ever been able to prevent. He made the dream sound like an invitation. The world government built the scaffold to end something. Roger stood on it and started everything. And the fire he lit from that scaffold has been burning for over 20 years, and still shows no sign of going out. Because you can kill a dreamer. You cannot kill a dream that has already been given to the world. You cannot execute an idea that is already alive in 10,000 hearts. That is what Roger understood that no one else in One Piece has fully understood. The most durable act of power in the world is not to hold something. It is to give something away so completely, so irrevocably, so joyfully, that no force in the world can ever take it back.